Canadian Affairs had this op-ed. I want to highlight this because it's really interesting. A lot of the media points at younger generations as just being these individuals that don't know what's happening, that are just angry for no reason, that they're voting emotionally. But here, as Canada Affairs op-ed pointed out, young Canadian men are not leaning right as media claim. Headlines continue to warn about youth radicalization, but the real story is how young Canadian men seem to be bucking these global trends. McLean's most recent cover announced the rise of conservative youth. CBC reported recently about how young men are radicalizing. The Walrus published The Kids Are Leading Right. These are fascinating storylines that built on how American men under 30 won decisively for US President Donald Trump and similar patterns that have emerged across democracies worldwide. But young Canadian men aren't following the trend. Headlines continue to warn about youth radicalization, but the real story is how Canada seems to be bucking these global trends. Unlike the United States and much of the world, Canada's young men remarkably have avoided the global conservative drift fueled in part by the online manosphere culture and anti-woke movement. I love how creative the wordplay with this generation is. Manosphere. From the people that brought you herstory comes manosphere. According to the most recent Angus Reid polls, young Canadian men mostly lean left and align with young women. Only one-third of Canadian men aged 18 to 34 plan to vote Conservative this federal election, the lowest of any age group among men. How do we make sense of our media's insistence that the manosphere is shaping young Canadian men when the data show our young men going against this stride? One factor may be that angry young men are a genuine and scary phenomenon in the Western world. One quarter of young men in 20 countries have shifted to conservative views over the last 2 decades, according to The Economist. In Germany, the far right AfD party has found a powerful audience among disaffected young men. In South Korea, at the 2022 election of overtly anti-feminist President Yoon Suk Yeol was propelled by a surge in support from young male voters. Young men worldwide celebrate Andrew and Christian Tate, manosphere influencers facing charges of human trafficking and rape in Romania. I haven't heard anything more about that. I haven't heard a single word, anything, even regarding that anymore. I don't. Did the trial just drop? Did they drop charges? Like, what's happening? I haven't heard anything. The Nelk Boys, a Canadian American social media group known for extremist commentary, have a significant online following in Canada. About 3 million Canadians regularly listen to Joe Rogan's anti-establishment podcast. Canadian data may also be tricky for media to navigate given its many ebbs and flows over the past 4 years. It's true many young Canadian men did swing to the right between the 2021 election and then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's resignation in January. 30% of young men supported the Conservatives the week of the 2021 election, a number that climbed to 43% in the week before Trudeau resigned. Less than 3 weeks later, in the days after Trump's inauguration, the number dropped to 36% of young men saying they plan to support the Conservative. Since then, that number has fallen further as men have shifted even more to the left. One hypothesis is that Canada's youth are dismayed by the politics they are witnessing south of the border, but their moderation may be rooted in traditional Canadian values too. Men aged 18 to 34 are more likely than older men to agree with the values of human rights, gender equality, and ethnoculture diversity, according to Statistics Canada. A significant majority of Canadian young men are satisfied with the way democracy works, a number that is 2 points higher than it was in 2010. They are the least concerned about their financial situation when compared to older men and women of all ages. This data reveal a counterintuitive truth while researchers worldwide scramble to understand youth radicalization. Canada should be studying that what fosters moderation among our young men. The question isn't why some Canadian men fall prey to extremist ideology, it's why so many do not. So that's what they're saying here. And that's just an op ed from Canadian Affairs. I don't think it's fully accurate on the 18 to 34-year-old, considering the fact that that is the demographic, that's the generation that's going to inevitably replace a lot of the older generation as they retire off, as the baby boomers are dissipating. That's the new generation that's going to, come into the workforce, and they're the ones that are going to have to deal and inherit this crisis. I don't think that's really the case of that, but that's just one person's opinion. Here, though, Benny Johnson tweeted this. Canadians 60 years and older are more worried about dealing with Trump than Canada's housing crisis or cost of living. Young people, question mark, they want affordable living costs and rent. Boomers look south, shrugged, and let Canada rot. So this is from Abacus Data, and they asked people. This shows a lot of why Mark Carney got the liberal minority. Not because people decide, hey, globalism is good, but because the older generation that's already on a pension, that has already worked endlessly to get where they are, and don't see the same problems and situations that younger people are facing or seeing in their backyard. A lot of younger people don't even have backyards, that matter. Most important factors when deciding the vote. And you can see reducing your cost of living. Very, very kind of big uptake with the 18 to 59-year-olds. You could see there, but less so for the 60 and over. Dealing with Donald Trump was the next one. You could see 18 to 29-year-old. Not a lot of people care. But look at 60 and over. Woo! Skyrocket. Because that's the demographic that's watching mainstream television. Those are the ones that are watching CBC. They're the ones that are watching CTV. They're the ones that are watching Global News, repeating over and over and over again that Trump is a threat. Trump is a threat to the stability of Canada. Trump is the threat to Canada. Trump is the threat to all your fellow Canadians and everything Canada. But failed to mention all these other points that they're mentioning here. Making housing more affordable. Improving Canada's healthcare system. Growing the economy. Making Canada a better place to live. Protecting public services. Managing the federal budget, deficit, and debt. Doesn't really get much support for budget. But at this rate, I mean, it's going to take a long shot miracle to balance that budget. But Trudeau will say it'll balance itself, right? That's what they say. So, Financial Post says Canadian economy heading for recession this year, according to Deloitte's outlook. Canadians should be prepared for really soft economic activity over the next 6 to 8 months. I would say it's already happening. I'd say it's already happening when people are making social media TikTok videos about how bad the grocery prices are, when there's 2 million families at food banks lining up around blocks, and they can't afford shelter, they can't afford heat, they're living on the streets. There's tent cities run amok. There's young kids that are in homeless shelters that are overdosing. I would say we're far beyond just a recession. We're far, far beyond that. And it's already happening. Um, and to add to this, Jasmine Lane points out that CBC has done an excellent job making a big deal out of nothing, and then shaming young conservative men. Let's break it down a bit further. So this is her actual takedown of this. The CBC, CTV Global, this is why there's a bit of a generational gap, is because the people who are watching this are getting sucked into the propaganda to think that younger people don't understand how Canada works. And they're the awful ones. They're the ones that are putting Canada at risk because they don't care enough about Trump. They don't care about enough about, LGBTQ issues or anything like that. But it's the complete opposite. Take a look at this.
That there is a portion of the voting public that pollsters aren't reaching, and that we could see a surprise, a blue wave, perhaps.
Do you want to know how desperate the Liberal Party of Canada is right now? There's nothing more telling than this, and also the story we're going to share afterwards. But the fact that there are people who have gone to Poilievre rallies who then see that, according to, whatever pollster, Mark Carney he's going to win the election with 98% of the vote, and people are thinking to themselves, that's kind of weird because there was like thousands of people at that Poilievre rally I went to. There's thousands showing their support online, thousands at other rallies. His videos are getting more views than most of the other candidates. It's just weird. It doesn't really make sense to me. And they're questioning that, which is completely logical and rational and human to do. And the Liberal and the propaganda machine that is the CBC has turned that instead into some sort of see, look, they're just like Trump. Oh, yeah. Remember when Trump said that he didn't trust the vote and that it was a rigged election? And now you've seen that translate into Canadian politics, where politicians are being asked these questions even. And it is like, there is nobody who lives rent-free in the Liberals' mind like Donald Trump. And it's do as I say, not as I do. Obviously, they are obsessed with the guy because it is unreal how frequently they are drawing those comparisons.
Someone's going to clip this and put it on social media and Cochrane's trying to turn, the Poilievre campaign to Trump stop the steal thing. They're not doing that at all. We don't know if this is just 6 or 7 people. We don't know how big it is, but when you start seeing this pop up in an election, I don't know. I get a little bit worried just in general. What are your thoughts here?
Well, I got to say, if you don't know if it's 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 people, why are we platforming them on the national public broadcaster?
Well, because it is also happening in some of the online publications on the right-wing things.
Sure.
But it does reach an audience of young men in particular, James, and it's how it starts, right? So I was just like, how do we deal with the resiliency of it, right?
Yeah, good save, but I don't think frankly, I don't think it should be platformed. But my message to them would be, instead of wasting your money on a banner and some hoodies and a ball cap, why don't you actually get involved in the political process? To their question, do you believe in the polls? I don't believe in a poll. I believe in the aggregate of polls, and polls are, all of them, even in the aggregate, are snapshots of a flowing river, and they're no predictor of tomorrow. They're a snapshot of where we might be today when you take the sum of all of them and you look at the mean. But
look, and James, I take your point about why platform them, and we struggle with this, right? But like Sherelle, they can find a platform in the internet age and will get platformed, and sometimes if you ignore something because you don't want a platform, it takes root before it's revealed to people, So
now this comes after there were a few people that, of course, the media then sensationalized, and it really just makes you wonder, what are they focusing on right now, and why is that their focus? Because there were a few people who said, do you trust the polls? They had signs and stuff like that read that. And again, as per my last statement, I think it's perfectly rational to wonder, weird that we're seeing such a huge turnout, but the polls are completely opposite. And of course they are, because polls are such unbelievably small sample sizes, and they really only represent the people who actually responded to the poll, right? That's not going to be the entire population. How on earth can a poll that has 800 participants, let's say, some of them do, that are all from the GTA, that are in their 50s plus. That doesn't represent the entirety of Canada as they claim it does. Like, it doesn't. It's a good representation of, okay, great, that's where those people are feeling like they're at. That's obviously not where the whole country is feeling like they're at, right? There's a reason maybe why pollsters have refused to do deep dive polls in Alberta, for example. But the thing about this that made me feel so irate, and, you know, if you know anything about my personal life, my story, I've shared it a few times, is the fact that David would go on this tangent about young men. Oh, it's dangerous. That's how it starts. You know, it's going to be platformed online. And again, too, it's like they're literally just questioning the polls. What danger is there in that? Like, honestly, like, oh, okay, so they're talking about the polls and questioning them and encouraging people to vote. What is the rhetoric that is derived from that makes people any harm to society?
So obviously this is where older generation that keeps watching that and they just keep regurgitating that is going to eventually believe that all these younger people are questioning the polls, and that sounds very much Trump-like, and that sounds a lot American. I bet it's something to do with social media. I think it's about time we contact our fellows at the in politics and politicians and lobby makers and lawmakers to decide to censor more people, because we gotta make sure the younger people aren't radicalized. And it also helps the CBC because, you know, a lot less people are watching us. That's why there's such a huge generational divide, because of stuff like that. Because the minute that someone questions the polls, the minute that someone has some speculation on the system, on the way that we have done things, in the election process, and she makes a great point that if you're polling only in Toronto, that's not a fair representation of, say, people in Alberta, or people in Saskatchewan, or people in the Yukon, or BC, or anywhere else in Ontario, for that matter. You're just taking a tiny segment of the population that live in condo buildings by Lakeshore. That's not going to do anything for the rest of Canada. And they're not willing to partake with the rest of Canada, which they are deliberately doing that to gaslight people, the people that are watching CBC, and peddle this garbage. And anyone that says differently, they want to say is radicalized. All these young people are radicalized. They're angry. I don't know why they're so angry all the time. I don't know, maybe instead of talking about polling and Trump all the time, focus on cost of living. Focus on the fact that inflation has made it impossible for people to buy basic groceries. Maybe mention those items. Maybe mention something that affects everyday Canadians, regardless of where you are in this country. That affects every single demographic. Not just the old and not just the young. Everybody. But they refuse to do so. And sadly, that's why the CBC is losing respect. Losing huge amount of respect. They're doing it to themselves. We're not doing it for extremist right-wing propaganda. They're doing it to themselves because they're not willing to step up to the plate of being an actual news informer. This is barely news. This is infotainment. This is an infomercial for the endless rhetoric of Trump. So, you even remember this, and I remind people about this, that the CBC, when America was having their election, the CBC covered it. The CBC was tracking down the American election between Trump and Kamala Harris. And you could see that the CBC was trying to peddle the conspiracies that NBC, CBS, CNN, all these platforms in America were also pushing. And Rachel Parker points out Canada state broadcaster is in a meltdown mode as Trump takes the lead, with pundits comparing Trump to Hitler. This is directly out of Hitler's playbook. That's what one of the commentators at the CBC stated about another country's election. And here we are just having our election done and dealt with, And Americans are talking about this. American podcasters and commentators are speaking about Mark Carney's interesting win. And the CBC is pouncing on that, saying, how dare Americans comment on our election? That's a threat to democracy. That's a threat to our democracy. You just did that to the Americans. You compared the president they elected to Hitler, saying it was out of Hitler's playbook. So that's why there's such a generational divide. That is why, unfortunately, Mark Carney's win is not going to unite Canada. It's going to make things even worse. And they did deliberately. This is a political tactic that politicians, when they want totalitarian rule, when they want the higher authority, when they want to manipulate and cause diversion, they do this purposely. They radicalize people of the older generation through gaslighting the mainstream media, through the younger generation that's being disfranchised from being even part of this conversation because the mainstream media lying to them. It's part of all this manipulation tactic, and it's done purposely to avoid the harsher conversations about how Canada screwed itself when it comes to cost of living, when it comes to the housing affordability, when it comes to now this newer generation that's going to have to inherit all this, that's now entering, the workforce and trying to start families and trying to better themselves here in this country. And this country just gave them a shit sandwich on top of a shit sandwich. And we are such in a burn right now. It's going to take way more of a miracle to dig ourselves out of this hole. But the mainstream media won't even have that acknowledgement. Everything's too focused on Trump. Trump is a threat. Trump is a threat. America's a threat. Tariffs. Elon Musk. It's all just fear porn. It's all just fear porn.